Hi everyone! So I'm very excited to say that this is going to be the first video proper in the series Paving Your Own Path. I kind of announced this series and gave a little bit of a preamble about it maybe not quite 2 weeks ago, and then I just had such a busy couple of weeks that I didn't get around to actually sitting down and making the first proper video. So this video is going to talk about divinity, how you see divinity, what the divine means for you, who your god or goddess is essentially. Because this to me is probably the most basic component of any religious or spiritual practice. If you don't have a grasp on what the divine is to you, what that looks like to you, what that means to you, where you stand in terms of that idea, even if it's a vague kind of stance, then I think you would probably find it quite hard to build a really meaningful religious practice. It's just kind of one of those kind of core foundational aspects of a spiritual or religious practice that needs to be set in place before you really start to build on that. And I think that sometimes it's something that people can skip over. It's something that you can get a little bit impatient when it comes to building your own practice with actually doing something and feeling something and experiencing something. And I will never say that you shouldn't jump into ritual, and I'm going to talk about later in this video, but I think people tend to sort of just skip past the big theological questions because it's just maybe a little bit hard to get to grips with, a little bit hard to pin down. And yeah, it can be something that you can kind of end up glossing over and not thinking about very hard. And I think it's perfectly okay to end up doing that, to end up with a spiritual practice that maybe celebrates an awful lot of other things other than really honing in on that idea of the divine. But I think that if you do get really solid with your understanding of what that means to you, it can bring your spiritual practice to a whole other level. It can really deepen your connection and deepen your experience because you kind of know what you're aiming for. This video is probably going to be a little bit more rambly, a little bit more scattered, and a little bit more just some random thoughts, rather than later videos I imagine will be a little bit more practical, that I might be positing some advice or exercises that you might want to do, and things that you might want to take into consideration, things you want to try as you're, say, if you're developing a ritual structure or a daily practice. Those things are a lot more kind of hands-on, and I will probably do things like show you what I do and give you other ideas for things that I've heard that other people do, and you know what I mean, give you a little bit more hands-on guidance. But when it comes to figuring out what you believe about God, there's not a whole lot of practical kind of stuff that you can really get on board with. The practical aspect of it is where you kind of start to work with images and symbols and practices, and those are things that I'm going to talk about in later videos. Probably the next video will be talking about spiritual imagery and symbolism and mythology and metaphor, all of that good stuff. And that's something that can very directly arise out of how you understand the divine. But I think getting a grasp on what you really believe about the divine is an important first step. So I wrote a blog post about this maybe just over a week ago, and I'll link it below, and you might want to start there because that blog post kind of posits some questions that you might want to take into consideration, that you might want to journal about as you kind of untangle your ideas about what the divine is. And even if you feel like you're comfortable with your beliefs about the divine, you're comfortable in where you're at and what you think, doing this kind of exercise can actually be really illuminating, even if you think that you're completely on solid ground. And this is something that I like to do every now and then. I like to kind of give myself some space and time to really unpack those ideas again, because you're always changing and evolving, you're always integrating new ideas and new experiences. And those ideas change, your beliefs change, and that's no bad thing. So it might be of use to you, no matter what stage you're at in your religious practice, to go away and really think about those questions. The questions that I posed I'll just list them quickly, are: what is divinity, first of all? Then, is your god / goddess, so god or goddess, immanent or transcendent? And by that I mean, do you see them as being present in the world? Are they literally a part of the universe? Are they in the universe? Are you divine? Is the sky divine? Or are they transcendent? Are they outside of the universe? And it can be both, or a bit of both. And then, is your god or goddess anthropomorphic? So are they human-like? Do you understand them to have a human-like kind of intelligence or consciousness? And then how can you directly connect with divinity? And that follows directly from the question of, are they anthropomorphic, and what their nature is, what the nature of God. I'll just say God, or maybe goddess, for the sake of ease. So those are some questions that might be of use to you, and I'll link that blog post below, like I said. And yeah, you might want to start with those questions and start kind of unpacking what your responses are to those questions. So essentially, when it comes down to developing a religious practice, I feel like there are two kind of threads to it. There is a difference between a practice of well-being and a practice of reverence. And a lot of the time in the paganism and the New Age community, and the focus can really be on that sort of well-being, kind of developing the self-development kind of trend, more than the reverence trend. Hard polytheists and so forth will tend to be very much on the reverence side of things, but then a lot of other New Age, pagan, earth-based spiritual people tend to be very heavily on the kind of well-being side. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but I think that maybe you might want to get pretty clear as you're going into developing a spiritual practice where you fall on that and what the two things mean to you. And when I say well-being, I feel that magic actually falls into that. Especially low magic, where you're talking about magic that you're performing to transform yourself or your life, to change your circumstances, anything like that. I would see that kind of practice of magic as being very much connected with other practices that aim for greater well-being, that move you towards greater well-being, and that, things like meditation, Reiki, chakra work, working with crystals, all of that kind of thing. Essentially, the end goal with using those kind of practices is to improve your well-being, to make yourself happier, to make yourself a better person. Now, often there is an idea that ultimately, through using these practices, you are connecting yourself with the divine. But I think it's important for you to maybe be clear about where that line is drawn for you. And if you are getting into kind of spiritual practices like that, like working with the chakras, working with various different types of kind of healing tools and stuff, get very clear on what that really means to you in terms of a reverential practice or in terms of devotion. Does it have a lot to do with acknowledging a divine presence for you, or is it something totally different? As I mentioned, in a religious practice or in a religious context, a practice of magic or well-being is generally going to be moving you towards greater connection with divinity. But there is nothing wrong with having those practices in and of themselves. And if that's not what you're aiming for, if that's not what you're using these tools for, then it's probably a good thing to be clear about that and to decide just how much space the idea of divinity needs to have in your practice. I would argue that a religious practice, generally speaking, focuses more on devotion and reverence and worship than on sort of self-development or practices that move you towards well-being and that kind of thing. A spiritual practice, on the other hand, to me is a slightly more broad term that can include those kind of healing tools and stuff like that without necessarily focusing on reverence or worship. Obviously, a lot of people who consider themselves to be spiritual, it is about that connection to the divine. It is about expressing their beliefs and expressing that connection. But that might be a useful distinction for you if you're finding it hard to figure out where you're falling and where your impulse to develop a spiritual practice is arising from. Is it arising from a need to do inner work, to go inward, to learn about yourself more, to become individuated, to become happier, to become more healthy? And those are all wonderful goals, and they can absolutely be part and parcel of a more kind of devotional practice as well. In my opinion, when you move inwards, you simultaneously move outwards, and you're moving beyond the ego. So you're sort of learning more about yourself, and then equally at the same time about cosmos in general. But basically, where that impulse comes from, if that's where the impulse is coming from, then you might actually find that placing focus on the divine isn't necessarily where you're at. But if you feel like your impulse is more religious, that it is arising pretty much entirely from a need to experience devotion and awe and those kinds of feelings, then obviously figuring out how you will connect with the divine is much more important. So that's an important distinction to make early on. And I think if you're having difficulty pinning down how you feel about divinity and what it means to you, then you might want to start off with a spiritual practice that focuses more on well-being, or more on magic, or whatever is interesting you at this moment, and see where it takes you. Because sometimes when you start doing that kind of work, it opens up avenues towards other feelings about divinity. For example, when I started my spiritual practice, I wouldn't say that it was a-religious. It was definitely religious in nature, but I was considering myself to be an atheist, and the connection that I was developing, to my mind, was merely with kind of my experience with the cycles of nature. I was kind of trying to move outside the ego a bit. And definitely a lot of it was focused on sort of practices of well-being, doing inner work, and basically doing some self-growth and self-learning and stuff like that. But over time, the more I kind of engaged in ritual practices, and the more I engaged in a spiritual practice in general, the more it opened up feelings of and experiences that led me to have to embrace the idea of divinity into my belief system. So wherever you are at right now is definitely not going to be where you're at for the rest of your life when it comes to how you feel about the divine. And I would say that's really important to say. It's really important to be clear on. Get clear on where you are right now and what you believe about the divine right now. And sometimes, if you're really honest with yourself, you might want to believe in a goddess, in a god. You might want to believe in multiple deities. You might want to believe in spirit. You might want to believe in the connection of all things, but you might actually not be quite there yet. And I would say what's happening there is probably a conflict of beliefs. You probably are holding several different kind of inconsistent beliefs within yourself, and that's okay. Just focus on whatever feels the most comfortable for you, what feels the most authentic for you right now, and express that, develop that, build on that, and build a practice around that, and we will talk about that in later videos. And then once you start to explore that, it will definitely open up more avenues for you. You will definitely, if you start getting serious about any sort of spiritual practice, it will deepen and it will evolve, and you might find yourself after a while moving into a space, into a belief system that feels kind of more like where you thought you would be at, where you want to be at. Obviously, you don't want to be kind of just convincing yourself or talking yourself into believing something that you don't really believe. That's definitely not a good thing, but yeah, be very honest with yourself about where you are at right now, and accept that maybe, if you haven't had a spiritual practice up until this point, if you have very little experience with religious ritual or anything like that, you probably haven't had many kind of transcendental or experiences. You probably haven't had any experience that you would have to say, oh, that felt like connecting with the divine, because you haven't been engaging with those parts of your mind. You haven't been engaging with the kind of tools, the kind of practices that lead to those experiences. So keep an open mind about this. And if you are an atheist right now and you just feel like connecting more to cosmos, connecting more to nature, and just kind of moving outside of yourself and expressing some of the feelings of awe that you might have about the world, about the universe, that's fine. Start there, and you might surprise yourself with where you end up. So I do have a couple of notes here, and I haven't followed them in the right order whatsoever, but I think I've pretty much touched on all the major points that I wanted to make in this video. And like I said, the blog post will be a very good counterpart to this video if this is something that you want to work through right now. But I wanted the video to maybe delve into some other areas a bit more, and kind of back up that blog post rather than repeating the same material. One last thing before I finish up this video, I think I'm going to talk a little bit about where I am at right now myself when it comes to my own beliefs and understandings of the divine. And I think this might be useful and interesting to you, because a lot of the time when I'm making videos and I'm talking about my practice and talking about my beliefs, I have to talk in pretty fixed terms, and I tend to use certain language and certain concepts to kind of frame what I'm saying and to explain what I'm thinking about. But I do want to be quite clear in saying that on some levels I am an agnostic. On some levels I feel like I can't possibly know any of this stuff, and none of this stuff is knowable. It's not comparable to something like a scientific method where you can either know something or you can't. Scientifically, something is either proven or it's not. When it comes to spiritual experience, to emotions and the depths of the psyche, it's all about experience. It's all about how you feel and how you respond to things and what happens in your mind when you do certain things, when you think certain things, and when you believe in certain ways. So I kind of feel like I've got a fairly fluid understanding of what my beliefs are and what belief really means at all. There are things that I believe because I feel them to be true. I experience them to be true. They are meaningful to me. They have helped me build a really meaningful, potent spiritual practice. But at the same time, I would be very quick to say that I don't think any of this is absolutely true. I'm very open-minded about what might be true or might not be true about the universe, and I'm not really convinced that we'll ever get to a point of understanding everything. We'll never understand everything. I mean, science does understand a lot, but I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where we know everything. And I also don't think that it's hugely important to know, to be 100% sure, for your beliefs to be scientifically provable. When it comes to spirituality or religion, a religious practice, that's not really what I'm aiming for at all. I'm not aiming for a kind of a dogma. I'm not aiming to be doing something or speaking to things, or I'm not really aiming to be right. The whole point is to be doing something that opens me up to experience, that opens me up to cosmos, that opens up my psyche, that opens up my imagination, and that makes me feel alive and connected. And it's all about the feeling. It's all about the feeling that I want to get to. And if my spiritual beliefs and my spiritual practice is getting me towards those feelings, then they're succeeding. And it's kind of like it's kind of like a never-ending cycle. I have a feeling, so I build on it. I follow it up with a practice, and then the practice evokes a feeling, and then, you know, it kind of goes round and round in a kind of ever-growing spiral. But I would say not to worry too much if you don't feel like you have perfect faith or something. You don't have to have perfect faith in, say, the god and goddess in order to revere them, in order to have a relationship with them. And you don't have to think that they're scientifically provable in order to have a really meaningful experience. And that is really my belief. Where I'm at right now with my understanding of the divine, I definitely still consider myself to be a pantheist. I also consider myself to be a panentheist, and I might make a video on that. To me, the divine is immanent. The universe is the divine, but the divine is also transcendent. It is what is, but it is also what is not. So the divine to me is also outside the universe, because it encompasses what does not yet exist. It encompasses the unmanifest, the kind of all the potential of cosmos, of the universe, that has not yet come into being. So that to me essentially is what the divine is. But the reason that I consider it to be divine is it really is just down to a matter of perspective and feeling, and it's just my own personal choice pretty much to decide that I think that this thing is divine. Now, I do have certain philosophical ideas about how the universe works and how consciousness works and things like that, and definitely those are not beliefs that are scientifically provable, and I'm not going to get too heavily into that right now because I'll just go down a rabbit hole and it'll take me half an hour to find my way back again. A lot of those ideas for me are based on the idea of the fractal, and the idea, like I said before, the Russian doll is an extremely potent image or symbol for me, in that it's sort of I would think of the universe as being sort of the same at all levels. So I assume that it is conscious at higher levels and at smaller levels because I am conscious, because I experience consciousness. Animals are to somewhat at least aware. And I know people will start arguing with me about this, because every time I mention consciousness, somebody, puts up their hand and says, no, that's not what consciousness means. Like, okay, we'll call it awareness if that makes you happy. So that's a really important thing for me, for example, is the idea of the fractal, the idea that everything is kind of repeated on a larger scale and on a smaller scale. And that to me, I suppose it's the largest scale of all, is to me what the divine is. But then also it's all the same stuff and it's all the same thing. So we're not separated from that. We are part of it. We are it. So that's kind of where I'm at with my idea of the divine right now. When it comes to working with personified deity, a lot of that to me, I understand that to just be happening within my own consciousness, within my own mind. But at the same time, I feel like I am connecting with kind of deeper patterns that are running through the entire cosmos, because, you know, I am part of a deeper pattern that is running throughout the entire cosmos. That is just how my belief systems kind of back up that sort of understanding of archetypes and what's happening inside my own mind. So obviously your beliefs are going to be totally different to mine. That is just how I come at it. For the sake of practice or simplicity, I don't think that when I have an experience with a deity, when a deity kind of comes to me in a path working or anything like that, I don't necessarily consciously think, oh well, there's a being outside of me that is, you know, talking to me. I do definitely kind of believe that I'm just talking to myself, but it's all to do with just the bigger picture and what context you put that into. I think that's covered all the points that I meant to cover in this video. I'd say that the next few videos might be a little bit more planned, a little bit more structured, but this one I just felt like I wanted to sit down and have a chat with you really about where you might start developing an idea of what divinity is to you, what that might look like and where it might go to. This series is definitely going to be, it's definitely going to work in a way that if people have questions, if it's a kind of question that might take a while to reply to, that like requires a meaty answer, I might actually make kind of reply videos alongside the main series videos. So if there's anything that you want me to delve into, if there's anything that you want me to kind of talk about a bit more, anything at all, please do ask in the comments below, and I will probably, like I say, if it's just a quick kind of answer kind of thing, I'll probably just comment back. But if it does sound like it will be relevant to a lot of people, or that it requires a slightly longer answer, I will probably make a video response. So I hope this has been helpful and interesting, and that it's going in the kind of direction that you're hoping that this video series would go in. I'm really excited to talk about next time, to talk about metaphors and symbolism and stuff like that. This is very definitely stuff that I'm still kind of working my way through to figure out what the most important, what the most salient points are to cover when it comes to building your own practice and stuff like that. So it's a very interesting exploration experience for me too, because I'm planning on writing an ebook at some point on this topic. And it's such a tangled kind of subject that I figured it would be a good idea to actually write some blog posts and make some videos first, to get my ideas out on the table first and get some feedback and get a conversation going and just see where it all kind of goes. So I would definitely like this series to be quite participatory and for you guys to to kind of help me move it in the direction that it's going to go. So yeah, I hope that was interesting. I hope that you're all really well. And there'll be a newsletter going out next week for the new moon. It's going to be a little bit early. I would have done it the following week, except that that's like Christmas. So there's going to be a new moon newsletter going out, and it's going to be one of those exclusive articles on connecting to your heart story. It might be the last of that series because I haven't decided yet what I'm going to be doing with the newsletter in the new year. So I'm not making any promises, but yeah, and I'm really excited about that. So yeah, if you want to sign up for the newsletter, if you haven't already, you should do so because it's cool. Yeah, in the new year I might actually focus more on the ideas again, on the series of paving your own path, and I've got various ideas of what I might do with the newsletter then. So yeah, okay, enough rambling. Take care, guys.